Welcome, everyone. This is Driven by Ideas, a podcast by Driven to Measure, where we dive into the stories, breakthroughs, and sometimes the myths behind the innovators who shape technology, mobility, and industry. We'll explore how ideas are born, tested, challenged, and sometimes misunderstood, but always leave a mark. Since this is our very first episode, let me introduce myself. I will be your host, and I've spent years in the automotive and tire world. This podcast is about more than stories. It's about the people and ideas that shape our machines, our culture, and even the challenges we still wrestle with in our daily lives. We'll mix history with insight, learning with a little humor, and curiosity with a little myth, so you can see these pioneers not as statues in textbooks, but as real, flawed, fascinating humans. When we thought about who should kick things off, we didn't go with your typical F1 hero or star. We went with a human who quite literally helped put the world on wheels. Our guest today is Harvey Samuel Firestone, founder of the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, a man whose visions transformed rubber from a sticky curiosity into a foundation of modern transportation. His tires carried Model Ts, tractors, and eventually millions of families down highways that didn't even exist when he was born. And yes, along the way, a few early tires might have carried people to their graves faster than intended, but progress rarely runs smooth. What mattered is that without pioneers like Mr. Firestone, America's mobility revolution wouldn't have happened. So born in 1868 in Columbiana, Ohio, he started life on a farm, learned the discipline of hard work early, apprenticed in bogey making, and eventually founded one of the great American industrial companies. So, it's an honor to welcome him. Mr. Firestone, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It feels unusual to be invited back across the century, but I appreciate it. Though I must ask, you could have started with Edison, Ford, or someone flashier. Why invite me first? Why tires?
That's a fair question. Personally, I believe tires are the most important component of any vehicle. They're not glamorous, but they decide everything: comfort, safety, even performance. I've spent some time working for several OEs across different areas and functions, so I've spent a lot of time thinking about rubber, noise, and vibration, and how they impact the end customer. I chose you, Mr. Firestone, because your work made mass mobility possible. Without affordable tires, Ford's Model T doesn't go anywhere. And without mobility, we don't have the America or the world we know today.
Well said. That was always my belief, that a good tire was not a luxury, but a necessity. I wanted to make them durable, dependable, and available to everyone, not just the wealthy.
And to be clear, you succeeded. Today, tires are everywhere. In fact, most of us only think about them when they're flat, which I suppose is the curse of making something too reliable. So let's start at the beginning. Your early years on the Ohio farm, the buggy apprenticeship, and that first failure tire business in Chicago. Because every empire, even one built on rubber, starts with a stumble.
Yes, I've always believed that the man who has his health, his farm, and his work is rich already. I was fortunate to have all three when I began, though the farm work was not always enjoyable at the time.
Fair enough. Though I suppose waking up to milk cows at dawn builds more persistence than a Harvard MBA. Haha. You grew up on a 360-acre farm, one of many children. How did that upbringing shape the way you later build your company?
Well, farm life teaches patience, and it teaches that results come only from steady labor. That lesson stayed with me, whether it was working with my brothers in the fields or later trying to convince Americans that automobiles were more than just novelties.
And that's a remarkable leap, because at the time, horses weren't just transport, they were tradition. Convincing people to swap them for gasoline and rubber must have felt impossible.
True, but I saw what the pneumatic tire could do. It gave comfort and speed where iron wheels only gave discomfort. Once people experienced the difference, they didn't want to go back.
So you weren't just selling rubber. You were selling the idea that travel didn't have to feel like a dentist appointment on cobblestones. You apprenticed in bogey making before tires, right? Back then, wheels were wood and iron. What made you look at vulcanized rubber and think, this is the future, instead of, this is just sticky tree blood?
I started in a Columbus carriage company. I saw how crude and rough iron-rimmed wheels were, how they shook passengers to pieces. When I read about the pneumatic tire and saw what Dunlop was doing in England, I knew this was the way forward. A tire that gave comfort, speed, and safety. By 1996, I opened my own tire business in Chicago, though it failed quickly. But failure was a good teacher.
Failure is a good teacher, spoken like a man who went broke before becoming a millionaire. Though these days, we just call that being a tech startup founder. Ha!
Failure teaches more than success. In Chicago, I learned what not to do. By the time I moved to Akron, I understood that mass production was the future. If we could build tires not just for the rich, but for everyone, then the automobile would no longer be a curiosity. It would be a necessity.
And you were right. You didn't just ride the automobile revolution. You gave it traction, literally. From farm chores to buggy shops to rubber factories, your early journey was anything but simple. But it set the stage for what came next. Partnerships with Henry Ford, camping trips with Thomas Edison, and the creation of an industrial empire. You and Henry Ford met in 1895, long before he built the Model T. What made that friendship so enduring?
Henry and I shared a vision. He wanted to build cars for the masses, and I wanted to build tires for the masses. We both believed in affordability through mass production. When the Model T took off, so did Firestone tires.
So it wasn't just friendship, it was synergy. Without Ford, you might not have grown so quickly. And without Firestone, Ford's cars don't get very far.
Precisely. A car without tires is no car at all.
Unless you're Fred Flintstone, then it's just a lot of running. Haha.
Fred Flintstone? I don't understand.
Oh, right. It's somehow way before and after your time. Bad joke, but moving on. Then there was Edison. You weren't just a businessman. You went camping with him, Ford, and even presidents. You called yourselves the Vagabonds. What was that like?
Well, imagine 3 of the richest men in America pretending to be outdoorsmen. We had chefs, cars full of supplies, even reporters tagging along. The only wild thing about those trips was Ford's conversations after dinner.
I bet. And did you ever try steering him away from those darker opinions?
I tried once, but Ford changing his mind was harder than changing a tire on a Model T.
The press loved it. Titans of industry roughing it in the wilderness. But sounds more glamping before glamping was cool. Not exactly Lewis and Clark, more like the Gilded Age goes camping.
Well, perhaps, but the purpose was the same. Time to think about the future, away from the factories and offices. Those trips weren't meant as hardship. They were for conversation, reflection, and camaraderie. We'd pitch tents, cook outdoors, and talk about the future of industry and the country.
Imagine this. Ford, Edison, and Firestone in the woods, cooking beans over a fire. Instagram would have lost its mind. But some say those trips were more than camping. They were networking sessions where industrial America was planned out.
There was talk of business, yes, but there was also talk of life. We were friends before we were tycoons.
Friends who happened to reshape the American economy while roasting marshmallows. Beats your average office retreat. Now, Mr. Firestone, every empire casts a shadow. There are rumors and controversies tied to your name. For example, Firestone's plantation in Liberia. Some called it visionary, securing natural rubber for America. Others called it exploitative.
It was about securing supply. The automobile age was creating enormous demand, and rubber was scarce. Liberia gave us land and climate suitable for plantations. We created jobs and infrastructure there. But I understand critics saw it differently.
History always looks at ambition with two sets of glasses, one admiring, one suspicious. To some, you were securing America's future. To others, it was America extending its grip abroad. Empires are complicated things. And speaking of complicated, your close friend Henry Ford wasn't exactly known for progressive views. In fact, his anti-Semitism became notorious. Some say you stood by him despite it.
Henry and I had our disagreements. We didn't share every belief, but our partnership was about industry, not ideology. I judged men by their work.
A practical answer. You are very smart, Mr. Firestone. Though it's fair to say, history tends to judge both. So during both World Wars, Firestone supplied tires to the U.S. military. That put you at the very center of America's war machine. Did you see yourself as an industrialist first, or a patriot first?
They were the same thing. Tires meant victory, whether on farms or battlefields. I saw it as my duty.
And it's true. Wars are often won not just on the front lines, but by the factories behind them. Steel, rubber, oil. They were as decisive as soldiers. So your life wasn't just invention and industry. It was also power, influence, and the occasional accusation of overreach. That's the burden of building something lasting. People admire, but they also question. Mr. Firestone, we've walked through your early years, your rise with Ford and Edison, and even the more complicated chapters overseas. But I want to close with something that matters today, legacy. This year marks 125 years since the founding of the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Akron, Ohio. When you look back, what do you hope people remember you for?
I wanted to give ordinary people mobility. A good tire makes a car affordable, a farm more productive, a journey possible. If people remember me for making life easier, safer, and more connected, then I've succeeded.
And they do. Millions drive every day on tires that bear your name, even if they've forgotten the man behind it. That's the strange fate of an industrialist. The brand endures, the face fades. Of course, history also remembers the shadows, Liberia, monopolies, the influence you and your friends held. Do you think history has judged you fairly?
History always simplifies. Men are never only what their critics say, nor only what their admirers say. I see myself as a man who believed in work, faith, and progress. That is enough for me.
Fair enough. You may not control how history remembers you, but at least you ensured that history rolls on 4 tires instead of 4 hooves. One last question. If you could look at the world of today, cars that run on batteries, tires designed by computers, and highways stretching further than you imagined, what would you say?
I would say, keep building. Materials change, methods change, but the purpose remains, to connect people. That is what progress is.
Harvey Firestone, farmer, inventor, industrialist, and the man whose vision gave America traction. This year, your company turns 125 years old. A century and a quarter later, the world still rides on your ideas. Thank you for being our very first guest, and thank you to everyone listening. Remember, behind every great invention is a human story. Sometimes glorious, sometimes complicated, but always worth telling. That wraps up today's episode of Driven by Ideas, a podcast by Driven to Measure. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, keep exploring the ideas that drive us forward.